Hey everybody, it's Ron, and I want to tell you a story about business and how that story changed everything. By the time the donkey started moving down the hill, the idea of enjoying the view had been quietly abandoned. This was no longer sightseeing. This was a negotiation between gravity, pride, and an animal that clearly had its own opinions. The rider sat stiffly, hands gripping the saddle horn, trying not to think about how narrow the trail felt once it began to drop. The donkey, unimpressed by the human's anxiety, stepped forward anyway, placing its hooves with a confidence that suggested this was not its first nervous passenger. Somewhere above, people talked about the Grand Canyon as a wonder. Down here, it felt more like an endurance test. The rider noticed things that hadn't come up in the brochure. The heat rising off the rock, the silence once the rim disappeared, the slow realization that going down was optional, but coming back up was not going to be. This wasn't exploration anymore. It was access, controlled, guided, and carefully managed. So, who decided how people experienced a place this vast? When did the Grand Canyon stop being something to conquer and start being something to regulate? And on February 26, 1919, when it became a national park, and on February 26, 1919, when it became a national park, was the real decision about preservation or about who would be allowed to profit from the view. From Business Basics, I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the daily podcast where we explain stories that changed business forever. Every date of the calendar has a story where business reshaped the world. February 26th, that story takes us to 1919, when the view became a business decision. Something to remember is that long before it became a national park, the Grand Canyon was already a destination. Not an easy one and not a cheap one, but a destination all the same. By the late 1800s and early 1900s, visitors were arriving by train, often on lines operated by the Santa Fe Railway, which actively promoted the canyon as a must-see stop in the American West. Hotels appeared along the rim. Guides offered trips down narrow trails, and mule and donkey rides became the most reliable way to reach the river below. This wasn't wilderness in the abstract. It was an experience that was being packaged for sale. And to keep everything organized, that experience came with structure. Trails were chosen and routes were maintained. Guides controlled pacing and access. Visitors didn't wander freely. They followed paths that had already been decided for them. Even early advocates for preservation understood this tension. Theodore Roosevelt, who visited the canyon in 1903, famously urged that it should be protected, but he also traveled there using the same rail lines, the same guides and services that made access possible in the first place. The canyon was being admired, but it was also being managed. And management, whether public or private, always raises the same question. Who decides how a resource this valuable gets used? By the time the Grand Canyon became a national park on this date in 1919, the argument was no longer about whether people should see it. They were already there. The question was who would control what happened next. In 1916, just 3 years earlier, the National Park Service had been created to manage federally protected lands. Its mandate was not simply preservation, it was balance, protecting landscapes while also allowing public access. And that balance mattered enormously at the Grand Canyon. Private companies already operated hotels, transportation, and those guided experiences. Railroads had built entire tourism pipelines around the Grand Canyon. Businesses expected to continue profiting from access to the land. Making the canyon a national park didn't eliminate commerce, it just reorganized it. In that process, concessions were formalized. Access routes were regulated and development was restricted in some areas and allowed in others. The federal government didn't remove the market. It set the rules under which the market could operate. When the Grand Canyon officially became a national park, the shift wasn't from business to no business. It was from informal exploitation to structured governance. And as you can probably figure out, the Grand Canyon didn't become quieter after 1919. It became more predictable. Visitors continued to arrive, trails were improved, mule rides persisted, and hotels expanded. Now those activities existed within a framework designed to last long beyond any single company or economic cycle. Preservation became part of the value proposition. By limiting development, the park ensured the experience remained rare. And by regulating access, it made tourism sustainable. By asserting public ownership, it ensured that no single private interest could permanently reshape the landscape for short-term gain, and that model spread. National parks became economic engines, not despite restrictions, but because of them. Tourism thrived precisely because the experience was protected from being overused or privatized beyond recognition. The Grand Canyon stopped being just a place people visited. It became a case study in how restraint, governance, and long-term thinking can create more durable economic value than unrestricted access ever could. The view didn't change. The rules around it did when the Grand Canyon became a national park on February 26, 1919. I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the podcast that finds the turning points behind the headlines. To hear more stories like this, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. If you're enjoying the stories, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a quick review. It helps more people find the story behind the business. And if you're wanting to actually understand business better, without the fluff or the buzzwords or the MBA language, start by visiting us at businessdailypodcast.com.